When I first rode up to the old Ward Ranch, I expected a ghost town. Dust, silence, maybe the occasional rattlesnake sunbathing where life used to be. Instead, I saw 7 women sitting in a perfect row on the front porch. Not one of them moved. As I approached, they just sat there, hands folded in their laps, as if they'd been waiting, and each one held a photograph. Not an old, faded picture, either. No, these were fresh prints. Of me, my face. Same eyes, same scar under the jaw from when I caught a fence post during a cattle drive. My heart slowed in my chest like it was trying not to be noticed. "You're late," the one in the green shawl said. I swung off my horse and stared at them. "I think you've got the wrong man." The one on the far left, gray hair and a long braid, lifted her photo and tapped the corner with a gnarled finger. "Silas Ward, born October 8th, 1856. You spent the summer of 1865 right here on this land. Your grandfather brought you." "I don't remember any of that," I said. My voice came out too sharp, too defensive. "You wouldn't," said another. "You were sick when you left. Fever, the kind that takes more than just strength." I took off my hat and rubbed the sweat off my brow. This didn't make sense. I'd only just inherited this place after my grandfather passed. A lawyer maid. It sounded like no one had touched it in years. "Who are you?" "We're the reason this place still stands," said the youngest of them, no older than me. "We've been waiting, just like your grandfather said we would. You promised to come back." I let out a hollow laugh. "Lady, I never promised anything." "You did," she said gently. "You just forgot." I took a slow step forward. The porch creaked. Under my boot, like it recognized me? I didn't know what to believe. Maybe they were conning me. Maybe the heat had finally cracked something loose in my mind. "How do you have those photos?" I asked. "We took them last year," the one with the braid said calmly. "We've been watching. Your grandfather had people, friends. We always knew where you were. We just couldn't reach out until now." There was a weight in my chest that hadn't been there before. Something heavy and old, like a buried chain tugging at my ribs. I looked at the house. The shutters weren't broken. The garden was growing. The place wasn't abandoned. It was a live dot, and these women. They weren't squatting here. They belonged. "You mind if I come inside?" I asked finally. The woman in green nodded once. "Of course, Silas. Welcome home." The inside of the house smelled like old pine and bread just pulled from the oven. It didn't feel like a relic, it felt lived in. Quilts folded neatly on chairs, floors swept clean, and the faint sound of a kettle whistling somewhere in the kitchen. I half expected ghosts. What I got were names. "Maggie," said the woman in the green shawl, tapping her chest. "Clarabelle, Ruth, June, Missy, Hattie, and Sadie." They nodded in turn. I repeated the names quietly, like a prayer I didn't know I'd need. "You've been here since my grandfather was alive?" I asked, settling awkwardly onto a wooden bench in the front room. Clarabelle nodded. "Since before you were born, some longer." "And he what? Took you in?" "He saved us," June said, her voice soft as a funeral hymn. "And you promised you'd come back when he was gone." I felt a twist in my gut. "You keep saying that. I don't remember making any promise." "You were 9, Maggie said. You had the fever, high as heaven. But you were kind. You listened. You told us you'd protect the place when he passed. That was 20 years ago." Sadie smiled faintly. "We're patient." I looked around. On the mantel above the fireplace were photographs. One caught my eye, standing beside my grandfather, holding a small wooden toy horse. My arm in a sling, my face pale. I don't remember that day. I don't remember ever being here. Ruth must have seen the confusion on my face. She brought over a dusty book and laid it in my lap. A journal. I flipped it open. The handwriting was rough, childlike. My name signed in clumsy letters on the first page. I want to live here forever. Grandpa says the women are safe now. They're like angels in dresses. My hands shook. I wrote this? I whispered. Maggie nodded. You were the only one who didn't ask what we'd done to deserve a second chance. A shiver ran through me. Double quotes, second chance. I asked. They exchanged glances. Hattie looked down at her hands. You were too young to understand then, Clarabelle said gently, and maybe still too young in some ways. But we knew you'd come back, June added. Your grandfather said you had the kind of heart that doesn't forget, even when the mind does. I stood up. My boots echoed on the wooden floor as I paced. This is madness. You can't expect me to believe I made a promise as a fevered boy, and now I'm bound by it. Missy stepped forward. She held something, wrapped in linen. When she unwrapped it, I saw a crude carving of that same wooden horse from the photo my initials etched into the bottom. You gave us this, she said. Said it was your favorite, that we'd keep it until you came home. The world tilted slightly. You're telling me I lived here? I asked. Spent time with you? You healed here, Ruth said. And then Maggie added, but healing always comes with a cost. I didn't know what to believe. My mind screamed for logic, for some clear line through this fog. But in my chest, something old and aching stirred. Maybe it was memory, or maybe it was guilt. That night I didn't sleep. The guest room they gave me still smelled faintly of pipe smoke and saddle oil, my grandfather's scent, lingering like he'd only just left. I stared at the ceiling while the wind creaked through the rafters. Somewhere deep in the house I heard quiet voices, the clink of dishes, the soft murmur of women who carried secrets like old scars. At first light I wandered through the house. Everywhere I turned, there were signs I had once belonged here. A child's drawing of the ranch house signed, S.Y. In backwards letters pinned to a wall near the pantry. A bookshelf with my name carved down the side. A dusty tin of marbles sitting untouched in a drawer marked Silas. I didn't remember any of it, but the evidence was undeniable. I found myself in my grandfather's study, a room lined with dark wood and heavier silence. His old writing desk sat under the window, just like I remembered from his home in Kansas, but this one was older, scratched by decades of use. I opened the bottom drawer and found a leather-bound notebook. Inside were dozens of entries in his thick, looping script. One line caught my eye. The women keep the place alive, and the boy, though small, sees their worth. I think he will carry this burden even if he never recalls how he came to hold it. A knock at the door pulled me out of the pages. Clarabelle stood there, hands folded, eyes steady. You ought to see something, she said. She led me out back to the barn. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams as we stepped inside. Tacked to one wall was a hand-drawn map of the property. Colored pens marked certain spots, mostly near the cliffs beyond the east ridge. I could see initials scribbled by each pen. What's this? Maggie entered behind us, her face unreadable. The spots where we buried pieces of our past. Your husband's? No one answered. But they didn't have to. You think I'll protect you, I said slowly, even if you did something permanent. We know you will, Clarabelle said. I didn't know what terrified me more, the implication that something violent had happened here, or the certainty that they believed I would defend it. I turned back to the map. There were 7 pins, 7 initials. All of them were abusers, Maggie said finally. Every one. Your grandfather gave us refuge. He made sure they'd never find us again. My throat tightened. I wanted to ask how. What had my grandfather done to ensure that? But before I could speak, Sadie burst through the barn doors, panting. They're back. I turned. Who? Riders, she said. 3 of them, same ones that came sniffing last fall. I followed them to the house. From the front window, I could see the dust trail rising in the distance. 3 men on horseback, moving with the ease of those who believed the land was already theirs. Are they law? I asked. No, Maggie said. They're worse. They're opportunists. The women began moving through the house with practiced precision, bolting shutters, locking trunks, hiding things I didn't recognize, and suddenly I understood something I hadn't before. This place wasn't just a ranch, it was a fortress, and I just inherited the war that came with it. By the time the riders crested the ridge, the women had vanished from sight, quiet as ghosts, swift as soldiers. Only I remained on the porch, leaning against a post, like I had nothing to hide. My heart was slamming so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, but I kept my hands visible. I didn't want to give them any reason to draw first. The lead rider was big, beard thick as a wolf's pelt and eyes hidden behind round spectacles that made him look smarter than he probably was. The 2 behind him were lean, rough, and didn't speak. But all 3 dismounted like they'd done it 100 times before and owned every piece of ground they stepped on. Morning, I said, trying to sound like I belonged there. You Silas Ward? The big one asked, removing his gloves. Finger by finger, I am. Well, hell, he said, smiling just enough to show he didn't mean it. We've been expecting you. I didn't say anything, just watched. You're a bit late, but I reckon the place is still standing, he continued, glancing at the porch, the roof, the barn beyond. Though from what I hear, the company's gotten real strange. I don't believe I know you. I said, You don't? Name's Brewer. These 2 are my associates. We're land men. Surveying for potential buyers? It's not for sale. Brewer chuckled. Everything's for sale, Mr. Ward, especially when it's tangled up in the kind of paperwork your granddaddy left behind. He stepped closer. See, your grandpa made some unconventional arrangements in his later years. Took in some folks, made promises that don't hold up too well in court. We're here to clear things up. I felt the weight of the revolver tucked behind my back, but I didn't move. Didn't blink, you mean the women, I said. He shrugged. Call them what you want. Squatters, widows, cult. Hell, I don't care. What matters is this land ain't theirs, and it might not be yours either. From behind the curtain inside, I saw Maggie watching, eyes like stone. You got papers? I asked. Brewer reached into his coat and pulled out a folded packet. Sure do. Deeds, mineral rights, leasebacks from the original mine owners. All very technical. But I figure a smart man like you might want to have a look before things get ugly. And if I don't? Then we start talking to marshals, he said, or neighbors. Start raising questions about how 7 women came to live out here all alone after their husbands vanished. About how your granddaddy never quite explained what happened at that mine collapse back in 72. I froze. That mine collapse had been part of family lore, a freak accident that killed several men and shut down operations. But now the story was shifting under my feet like wet sand. What do you want? I asked. He smiled wide this time. I want you to sell, quietly. We give you cash, you ride away, and we clean the place up. You mean bury it, I said. You say potato, he smirked. I stepped off the porch. You need to leave. He raised his eyebrows. That your final word? For today. He nodded, but the threat didn't fade from his eyes. We'll be back. Don't wait too long to figure out whose side you're on. They mounted and rode off, dust boiling behind them. I stood in that dust for a long time, throat dry as the dirt under my boots. I'd come here to claim a ranch. But what I'd inherited was something far more dangerous, a secret wrapped in blood, buried deep beneath the surface, and men were coming with shovels. That evening the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. No one lit the lamps. No one spoke unless they had to. The walls seemed to press inward with every tick of the clock on the mantel, like they were holding their breath with U.S. I sat at the kitchen table with Maggie and Clarabelle, while the others kept watch from different windows. A rifle leaned against the sink. A pistol sat beside the bread box. I was starting to understand the kind of place I'd stepped into. "They've been circling for months," Clarabelle said, "trying to scare us off, pick holes in the story." "What story?" I asked. Maggie met my eyes. "The one your grandfather built to protect us, the one we've lived inside ever since." She slid a folder across the table. I opened it and found old mining maps, tax filings, property surveys. Some real, some obviously forged. My grandfather had created a smokescreen of fake transactions and claims enough to muddy any outside inspection. "Your grandfather was a genius with paper," Maggie said. "The truth is, the land passed to you years ago. But he kept quiet, in case someone tried to come sniffing. He didn't want the women named in any document. Too dangerous." "And the mine collapse?" I asked, flipping to a yellowed newspaper clipping. "Tragic accident at Devil's Creek mine. 5 men dead. 1 missing." "Not an accident," Clarabelle said. "Not completely." The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to hush. "They were our husbands," Maggie said. "Drunk, cruel, dangerous men. Your grandfather helped us escape them. One by one, he gave them work in the mine. Then she didn't finish. She didn't have to. You're saying he killed them?" I whispered. "No," she said, her voice brittle. "He gave them a chance to redeem themselves. But the mine was unstable. He knew that. They knew it, too. And you let them go in anyway," I said. "They insisted," Clarabelle said. "He offered them a new start. Said he'd pay them, build the future. They chose greed, chose anger. When the collapse happened, he pulled out every man who deserved saving. And the one who went missing?" I asked. They both looked away. "That was mine," Maggie said softly. The silence after that was thick and deep. I stood and walked out to the porch, needing air. The night sky above was massive and clear. I leaned against the railing and tried to make sense of the mess in my head. These women weren't criminals, but they weren't innocent either. And my grandfather, he'd created something between a refuge and a graveyard dot, and now I was the one standing at the edge. Footsteps behind me. Ruth appeared, holding a bundle of papers. "I found these in your grandfather's drawer," she said, offering them to me. "They were meant for you." I unrolled the top sheet. A letter. His handwriting. "If you're reading this, boy, then I'm gone, and the weight's on your shoulders now. I didn't raise you, but I knew what kind of man you'd grow into. You've got a choice. Let wolves eat the sheep or learn how to carry a rifle and a pen at the same time. If you stay, don't just defend them out, thank the bastards. That's how I kept this place safe. You'll have to do better." I stared at the words until the ink blurred. I had thought I came here to claim land. Turns out I'd been handed a legacy of secrets, lies, and maybe justice, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to carry it. The next morning I found Sadie sitting in the barn, humming an old song and whittling a scrap of cedar. Her hands moved with calm precision, like the blade and wood were long-time friends. When she noticed me, she didn't stop, just nodded for me to sit on the overturned crate across from her. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't." "Good," she said. "Means your conscience still works." I let out a breath, ran my fingers through my hair. "I don't know what to do, Sadie. Every step deeper into this place feels like walking into a swamp. The more I learn, the less sure I am who's right." She looked up at me, eyes full of something both tired and kind. "We never asked to be right, Silas. We just asked to be left alone." After a long pause, she handed me a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were 7 wedding rings, old, some bent, some still shining, all different sizes. "Those were real," she said. "So were the bruises." She stood and walked out, leaving me with the weight of metal and memory in my hands. Later that afternoon, the women gathered in the parlor. I sat in the center of the room while they spoke, one by one. Clarabelle went first, her voice steady. "I married at 16. He was twice my age and liked to remind me. After the second miscarriage, he stopped pretending to care what the bruises looked like. Then Ruth, mine was a preacher, only beat me where the congregation couldn't. See, Maggie, he said I was lucky to be fed, lucky to be alive. After he took my sister's savings and left her in a ditch, I stopped feeling lucky. Each story came like a hammer blow. 7 women, 7 kinds of horror. And behind all of them, one common name, my grandfather. Not as villain, but as savior. He found us," June said quietly. "He didn't pity us. He offered a way out. We made our own choices after that." "And the mine?" I asked. "You're telling me it was what, mercy?" "No," Maggie said. "It was a door. They walked through it. We didn't push. I felt a sick weight in my stomach. You helped him bury them." "We helped each other survive," Clarabelle said. "Is that so different?" I stood, my head spinning. "So what happens now? You think I just lie? Keep the story going? Be your shield?" Sadie stepped forward. "No. We think you decide what kind of man you are." Later, I found myself back in the study. I opened the ledger again, this time reading it cover to cover. My grandfather had documented everything, every dollar, every risk, every detail of the women's new lives. He never used their real names. He never mentioned the men. But between the lines it was all their dot, then tucked in the back. I found it. A deed transfer. Signed. Notarized. Quietly recorded under a shell name that led straight back to me. I wasn't just the heir to this place. I owned it, and that meant I could protect it. I sat back in the chair and stared at the fire. Heart pounding. Maybe justice didn't look like a badge in a courtroom. Maybe sometimes it looked like a group of scarred women, a broken ranch, and a man with just enough nerve to stand between them and the rest of the world. I thought of what? Brower said, "Figure out whose side you're on." Now I knew. I stayed up through the night, oil lamp burning low and a mug of bitter coffee gone cold beside me. The old desk creaked every time I shifted, but I didn't stop. I was searching, scanning every page, every drawer, every folder my grandfather left behind. Somewhere in the mountain of papers was the way out. Not just for me, but for all of us dotted dawn. I found it, tucked inside the false bottom of a wooden box marked Feed Accounts, was a sealed envelope. On the front, and my grandfather's familiar scrawl, "Only if they come back." I broke the wax. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a transfer of deed legal and airtight granting the entire ranch to me, dated years ago. The second was a deposition, written in my grandfather's hand, detailing the abuses each woman suffered. He left out names, but the stories were unmistakable. The third was a statement addressed to the U.S. Marshal's office, outlining an alleged robbery committed by several local men, including the now deceased husbands, during a failed heist. On the old mine payroll, my grandfather claimed they disappeared with the loot, and the mine collapse covered it all up. It was a lie, but a beautiful one. I stared at it for a long time. A story, written in truth's clothing, one that painted the women as innocent witnesses, the men as outlaws, and the mine as a grave for thieves. It was fiction, but it could be believed. I heard boots behind me. Maggie, you found something? I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, mouth tightening into a straight line. You sure you want to be part of this? She asked. I already am. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Clarabelle ironed the documents. Ruth cleaned the house like company was coming. Missy took my revolver and cleaned it with the care of someone preparing for war. We didn't have long to wait. Just before sunset, Brewer returned. He wasn't smiling this time. His 2 men flanked him, each with a rifle slung and hands itching. But Brewer walked alone toward the porch where I stood waiting, papers in hand. No ladies today? He asked, glancing around. They're inside, I said. Where they belong, he scoffed. You decide to take my offer? I decided to make you one instead. I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, eyes narrowing with each page. Forgery. He muttered. No, I said. Official. Recorded in Santa Fe, notarized by Judge Kelly himself. Go check if you like. He paused. And this marshal's letter? You send one more man up this road, and that letter goes straight to the Federal Post, I said. With the press, the law, and every church committee between here and Abilene watching. He looked up at me, jaw tight. You threatening me, boy? No, I said, voice flat. I'm outsmarting you, just like my grandfather taught me. Behind me, the front door creaked open. The women stepped onto the porch, not huddled or afraid, but standing tall. 7 of them, no makeup, no smiles, just truth in every wrinkle and scar. Brewer looked from them to me, and something behind his eyes finally broke. He folded the papers, handed them back. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. No, but you might. He turned and walked back to his horse without another word. When the dust cleared, Maggie came up beside me and put a hand on my shoulder. You're your grandfather's boy, she said. I shook my head. No, I'm something else. Because I hadn't just inherited the land. I'd inherited the fire. For 3 days, no one came near the ranch. The horizon stayed clear. No riders, no threats. Just wind through the grass, the clatter of tools as the women patched fences, fixed shutters, and replanted the south garden. I helped where I could, but mostly I watched. I was watching them reclaim something that had been stolen peace. The weight in my chest didn't lift right away. I kept waiting for Brewer to circle back with more men, or a sheriff who didn't care about papers and past sins, but none came. On the 4th morning, I rode into town alone. It was the first time I'd left the ranch since arriving. The postmaster confirmed what I needed. Yes, the deed was on record. Yes, Judge Kelly had notarized it personally. The federal land agent had no interest in disputed old claims without proof. And when I passed the saloon, Brewer's men were gone. Just vanished like dust blown off a WINDOWSILL. But the strangest thing was how different I felt. Like I was no longer a drifter wearing someone else's boots. I was Silas Ward, and this land was mine. When I returned to the ranch, Ruth was on the porch, peeling apples with that same quiet grace she'd shown since day one. She looked up and smiled, not with relief, but with something older, pride. How was town? She asked. Quiet. Nobody's looking for trouble. Then we did it right. Inside, the house was alive with smells: roast venison, herbs, red baking. The women moved like a choir without song, each one knowing her part. But now the tension was gone. The fear had burned away. After dinner, we all sat by the fire. No one said much, until Maggie cleared her throat. "We've talked," she said, her voice soft but sure. "And if it's all right with you, we'd like to stay. Not just as guests, as family." I looked around the room at Clarabelle stitching a quilt, at Missy playing a soft tune on the harmonica, at Sadie rubbing oil into an old saddle. 7 women, none of them bound by blood, but all of them bound to this place, to me now. "You never had to ask," I said. They smiled then. Not big, not dramatic. Just small, worn smiles from people who'd been through too much to take joy for granted. Later that night, I went back to the study. I opened my grandfather's ledger one last time and wrote a new entry at the end. August 1881. The house is full. The land is quiet. We are no longer hiding. We are home. I leaned back in his old chair, closed my eyes, and listened to the creak of the walls and the soft laughter drifting from the parlor. The war was over, not because we won with bullets, because we held the line and outlived the past. This is the final part.